Believe it or not, Abraham fought the Battle of Armageddon, a pre-battle, but what an allegory. What a magnificent picture. We're going to talk about it on today's Prophecy in the News. Abraham and Lot couldn't get along. So Lot moved down into the beautiful, well-watered plains below the Dead Sea, to Sodom, to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me what happened next.
Well, J.R., we have one of the great stories in the Bible, and I venture to say one of the most overlooked stories in the Bible, but perhaps after today, you'll go back and read it yourself. As Abraham and Lot separated, J.R., we're set up now for a story that has to do with the eventual settling of the entire world by the righteous heirs of the seed of Abraham. And it starts way, way back 2,000 years before Christ. Abraham and Lot, or Abram as he was known at that time, could not get along. They kept having cattle disputes, and their herdsmen kept arguing and fighting. And so Abraham said to Lot, choose any part of the land you want. Lot chose the good part, down where we see salt and dust today, the south of the Dead Sea. But back in those days, apparently, it was beautiful before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. This having happened, they settle into normal living. God appears to Abram and says, look to the north, south, east, and west. Everywhere your eyes look, that will be your land. This having been accomplished, we come to Genesis 14, where I read in the first verse, and it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. So we have a war here described right after God's third appearance to Abraham. And I think for years, I know I did, and probably most people read across this and say, well, ho-hum, boring, let's move on to something interesting.
You know, Gary, the fascinating thing about this to me is that they served Kedorlaomer for 12 years, and in the 13th year rebelled. Now, this number 13, of course, is the number of rebellion. It has come down through history as an evil omen, and right here in the opening chapters of Genesis, we have this number 13, true to its calling.
13, the number of rebellion. Well, J.R., I began to look, and then we started talking about this, and we got very excited because the four kings who do this invasion, they get together, they form an alliance, a confederation of armies. These four kings, beginning with Amraphel, as described in Genesis 14:1, are four major historic kings. Amraphel, as a matter of fact, some have said this is Hammurabi, who developed the Code of Hammurabi, but he came much later, from between 1792 and 1750 BC, much later than Abraham's day. And so I went back to a Jewish commentary. Jewish history says that Amraphel is none other than Nimrod himself. Isn't that interesting?
I think it is fascinating because Nimrod was the one who built the Tower of Babel and caused the scattering of the people across the earth. He must have lived for a long time for him to be the Amraphel listed here.
That's right, and the event of the Tower of Babel happened just shortly before this conglomeration developed. So we have Amraphel, who really represents Babylon. More than that,
if he's king of Shinar, isn't he?
Yeah, king of Shinar. More than that, if he is Nimrod, he represents not only Babylon, but Mystery Babylon the Great, the whole system of idolatry. You know,
he's the one listed first here, isn't he?
He's the one listed first. That's right.
Now, he is not the leader of the world at this time.
Right.
The nations have been scattered, and yet he is the first one mentioned because Babylon was the first world empire.
It was the head of the empires. The second king mentioned here is Arioch, king of Elasar. Now, some people phonologically link the name Elasar with Larsa, which is a territory in Persia, ancient territory. And they say, well, he's a king of Larsa. But as you look at who the king of Larsa was, he doesn't fit. And in fact, the better fit is to say that Elasar is phonologically linked to Elas, which is what the Greek people call themselves. And so Arioch, and in fact most authorities say that Arioch ruled the southern part of Asia Minor, Cappadocia, and the regions to the west toward Greece.
Which would be Greece.
And so we're talking here about the kingdom of Greece. Early on, many years before Greece became a major world power, but nevertheless it's the same people and kingdom.
So we're leading up to the concept here of the four great world empires, aren't we?
Four great world empires.
So we already have Babylon and Greece. The third one.
Third king mentioned is Kedorlaomer, king of Elam. Well, clearly Elam is Medo-Persia. Much later, during the days of Daniel the prophet, Elam became Medo-Persia. And finally, we have the last of the four kings, Tidal, king of nations, or as the Hebrew text has it, king of Goyim. Well, he's easy to place in history. According to Jewish history, he's Tudaliah I, the great Hittite emperor who is known as the first warrior king. That is to say, he hired merchant armies from all over the world. That's why he's called King of Nations, or King of the Goyim. He put together a mercenary army, and the Jews say that he is the model for Rome. In fact, they make the flat statement in their commentaries, Tidal is Rome. And in fact, reading here from the commentary on Genesis by Rabbi Meir Zlotowitz, according to the Midrash, Goyim, nations, refers to Rome, which levies troops from all nations, that is Goyim. And he quotes Rav Eliezer Bar Abina, who said, when you see the powers fighting each other, look for the advent or the feet of King Messiah. And so they link these four kings with a prophetic overview of the latter-day powers that would finally bring the Messiah. Isn't that interesting?
It certainly is. Now, you know, Gary, we have this event occurring after 2,000 years since the creation of Adam, right at the break point of the end of the second millennium.
Right.
Toward the end of the next set of 2 millennia, we have the actual nations with Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. We have all four kingdoms in just the last few hundred years of toward the end of the second set of 2,000 years.
That's right.
Now we today live at the end of the third set of 2,000 years. Let me break it down like this. 6,000 years can be broken down into 2,000-year increments. One, the Jews called, or the rabbis called, chaos. The second 2,000 years, the flourishing of the Torah, or the Mosaic Law. And then this 2,000 years, which we say is the dispensation of grace. So we have 3 2,000-year periods here. At the end of the first 2,000 years, we have these four kingdoms epitomized, allegorized by these four kings in a battle of monumental proportions.
Absolutely.
And not only these four kings, but the others who are involved in this, such as the 5 kings of the 5 cities of the plain. And then there were the giants also that we shall get into.
Yeah, we've got
all of this pictures Armageddon, doesn't it?
It does picture Armageddon, the final battle. We've got to take a break soon, but when we come back, we're going to detail the battle itself, because the 4 northern kings, representative of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, invade the Jordan River Valley. They march all the way south to the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot happens to be residing.
And the fascinating thing about it is there are oil wells down there.
Oil wells. and the story actually includes a description of oil and oil-producing country. So I think you're going to be amazed at what's written here. Now, remember, Daniel's prophecy of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome wasn't given until 1,600 years or so later than this.
Yes.
So this predates Daniel's prophecy by a full 1,500 or 1,600 years, and yet the pattern is there. There are no accidents in the plan of God. He knows the end from the beginning.
It's amazing to me that these kings of the south served Chedorlaomer and paid their taxes for 12 years. In the 13th year, they rebelled against Chedorlaomer. 1,300 years after Abraham, the Jewish people fell to the invasion of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, the first of these four kings of the second set of 2 millennia. And Gary, so what we have here is a microcosm of the greater picture.
The greater picture, world history, call it Gentile world history. Here we have the great kings invading, if you will, the Middle East. Let's just call it that, because that's really what it is, the heart of southern Canaan. Now, the kings that ruled down there where Lot lived were 5 kings. The first one, Bera, means of evil. The second king is called Birsha, which means of wickedness. The third king is called Shinav, or Shinab, as it appears in English, which means hatred of the father. And the fourth king, Shemeber, means a rebellion against God, to make a name for oneself or to rebel against God. And then the last little king isn't even named. He's just called the king of Bela, which is Zoar. Now, Zoar is the little city on the north of this territory where Lot, many years later, fled for refuge. And so the implication is that Bela, or Zoar, is not as evil as the others. Now we have the setting, more or less, for the story. And it gets fascinating from here on in.
What's interesting to me here is that they failed to pay their taxes.
They did.
So the war was over money.
It was.
It was a money war.
Yeah, the implication...
Every war of history has been over money.
You're correct.
Including Armageddon. It's going to be over money.
That's right, the rich
the
man.
Mark of the beast.
Well, you know, in this war, we have the battle fought in some place called the Valley of Siddim. And in verse 10 of chapter 14, and the Valley of Siddim, or as it says in the King James, the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. Now, J.R. is right when he's talking about money. Chedorlaomer, who at this time, the king of Elam, is the most powerful of the Northern Alliance, has been exacting tribute from these southern kings. And J.R., we find out what the tribute is, I believe, because as you look at the text, where it says, and the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, what it actually says in the Hebrew is wells of oil. The Hebrew is be'erot, chemer. Be'erot means wells, and it's repeated twice, which is the Hebrew way of saying many chemer, or bitumen wells, or let's call them oil wells.
Yeah.
Because what they used to do, and it's exactly what we used to do in Pennsylvania, where the first American oil strikes were found, oil seeped up. It was seen on ponds and surfaces, and men would dig down with shovels and make pits. The pits would fill up with oil, and then the oil was collected and used for many products. Thus it was in Sodom and Gomorrah. And guess what tribute they were paying to the kings of the north? I think it was oil products. Now, does that remind us of a latter-day setting or not?
Well, here we are at the end of the third set of 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And we have these nations today creating problems over the oil of the Middle East.
Today we call them OPEC.
Yes.
And you know, since the 1930s, the nations of the world, shall we call it the revived Roman Empire, has been attempting to control the oil flow out of the Middle East. And the princes, and let's call them what they are, the evil princes of the Middle East have gotten fabulously wealthy from their oil. And they're talking about rebelling. They're talking about raising prices and saying, we're tired of the Europeans running our oil interests. We want to run these things ourselves. And you know, that could start a war, J.R.
Yes, it could. I'll tell you, this is really a fascinating story.
We've
got Chedorlaomer here, the big cheese.
You had to say that, didn't you?
Of course I had to say that. And then there's Tidal. I wonder if tidal wave, came from that.
He certainly came like a tidal wave. Yeah. Well, the invasion took place. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah no doubt staged their defensive battle on their own turf. And they thought, well, we stand some chance against these huge armies. But they lost heart, they fled, and they were trapped in their own slime pits. Or as the Jewish expositors say, they ran and hid in their own oil pits, hoping not to be found. And yet they were found anyway, trapped by their own oil. Irony of ironies.
Now, Abram comes with 318 trained soldiers.
Right.
Trained servants. And fight these people all the way to the upper portions of the promised land called Dan. How does all this fit in the allegory?
It's fascinating because as the nations came south towards Sodom and Gomorrah, they smote the Rephaim, they went into the land of the Horites, the Amorites, the precursors of the Moabites were down there. They made examples of all these nations. They captured Lot, took him prisoner, took the spoils, and headed back north again toward the country of Dan with Lot as prisoner. And this is where Abraham is drawn in. And with 318 men, he goes to rescue Lot.
Isn't that a kind of a small army?
It's a very small army. 318 men against the forces of the world. And J.R., doesn't this speak of latter-day tiny Israel finally being victorious against world forces? I think it does.
Abram's the father of Israel.
Absolutely.
So you're saying here that with all of the problems that Israel faces today, Israel is going to be the victor in the final big battle.
Right. And it will look impossible. How can you beat Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, that is the nations that represent the world powers, with only 318 men? Well, it's God that does it. Men do not wage those battles, and God will figure out a way for Israel to win.
It's kind of sad that we are not told the details of that battle here, you know.
No, we're not. But, oh, it's fascinating.
But they win the battle up at Dan, so we've got just a little glimpse here of Dan's part in the future.
The country of the Antichrist, shall we call it, up near Damascus today, in the country of Dan.
Dan would produce the Antichrist?
The battle is waged against these kings in an evil country. And you know, this puts Abraham in a global setting, J.R.
Yeah.
Before this, he was a little guy. Well, he was probably fairly wealthy, but he was just a citizen of Ur. God said, get up and go to a land that I will show you. He goes. God makes a covenant with him and says, I'm going to give you the north, south, east, and west. And then as if to cement that idea, Abraham is placed in a world context, fighting against 4 great national powers. And suddenly he's not Abram of Ur anymore. He becomes Abraham, father of many nations, who has fought the world and won.
And when he comes back from the victory of this battle, he comes to Jerusalem.
He comes to the Vale of the Kings, or the Dale of the Kings, which is the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And I wish we had time to talk about the symbolism of the valley here, because the last great battle is said to be fought symbolically in the valley of Jezreel, called Armageddon. And many people have said that the valley here is a symbol of the final clash of nations. So the Vale of Siddim is typical then of the valley of Jezreel, the Battle of Armageddon.
And he meets Melchizedek.
Meets Melchizedek, who comes out and brings forth the cup and the bread. Abraham receives the new covenant. And J.R., that's exactly what's going to happen to Israel. The latter days, at the end of the tribulation, they are going to, Jeremiah 31 says it all, in that day, you know, I will give them a new covenant.
And the greater Melchizedek will come.
That's right.
At the Battle of Armageddon. And so we've got everything here in chapter 14 of Genesis that is an allegory of the future end-time battle when Jesus Christ, priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, comes and saves the day. And Abraham gets his city and his nation, and the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant during the 7th millennium, the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ.
The Jews say that Abraham was born in the year 1948 after creation. And they say that in the year 1997 after creation was when this war began. Isn't that amazing?
If this all started in 1997 after the creation of Adam, tell us In what context and how that works,
The
Gary?
context is that in the year following the dispersion from the Tower of Babel, all of this rebellion and shuffling of power began. And the Jewish historians say that in the year 2023, which is 27 years later, Abram had rescued Lot and came back to Jerusalem. He's at the age of 75 at this time, and he receives the new covenant from Melchizedek.
And we're not trying to set a date by giving you these dates, but it is fascinating how in 1948 Abram was born,
Right.
you know, and Israel was born in 1948
Wow.
as well. Fascinating. This is J.R. Church and Gary Sterman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For a free complimentary copy of the magazine, call our offices directly at 1-405-634-1234 or write to Prophecy in the News, P.O. Box 7000, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma 73153.